We're going to get a snapshot of current trends in freight payment with a look at the Freight Payment Index for the second quarter from U.S. Bank and my guest, Bobby Holland. He is Vice President and Director of Freight Data Solutions with U.S. Bank. Bobby, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
According to your most recent Freight Payment Index, what did Q2 look like in terms of freight shipments, volumes, payments, and the like?
Well, it looked as bad as probably most people expected it to be from the standpoint that this is when the brunt of the COVID impacts hit the economy. Nationally, shipments were down about 8%, 7.6%, and spend index was down 13.7%. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was definitely a big hit.
Hardly a surprise, though, given what's happened to the economy. Do you break it out by mode of transportation?
No, we don't. Not particularly. The index is based on truckload and less than truckload data because that's about 80% of our data is TL and LTL. So that's the primary mode in this particular generation of the index.
Right. Do you break it out by regions at all?
Yes, we do. We break it out into 5 regions: West, Southwest, Midwest, Northeast, and Southeast.
Okay, so what is it telling you there? Where are the best, the worst? What are the differences between those 5 regions in Q2?
Well, in Q2, the Southwest actually had the best results. It was actually up in shipments, was up 1.3%. Spend, however, was down 21.4%. The second best results were in the West. They had a small down of 1.8%, and spend was only down 7.5%. And this was largely because in the West, port volumes were kind of dragging things down, but the West also had the best initial handling of the COVID. And so therefore, they didn't have as severe of an economic impact initially in Q2 as other. The Midwest was buoyed up by renewed manufacturing activity in Mexico and thus better cross-border shipments. And that's why they were actually up a little bit. In the Midwest, shipping was down about 5.5%. Spend was down 11%. Northeast, which was considered one of maybe the epicenter of COVID, being one of the hardest hit regions, Northeast was down 12.6%.
Oh, wow, that's a big one.
Was down 12.7%. And then the Southeast, which usually has the better results, they were down 14.1% in shipments and 21.4% in spend. The Southeast region usually is resilient. They had later stay-at-home orders, but then they had more recent spikes as well. Northeast is taking a more regional approach to dealing with COVID. So the results currently, as we're going into Q3, looks like we flatten the curve a bit and are managing the COVID going into Q3 better. So it'll be interesting to see what Q3 looks like there. That's pretty much the overview.
Now, I'm just wondering about the correlation of the results of the freight index to the amount of businesses shut down, to the amount, to the degree to which the pandemic has spread, in which there are reportable cases in those regions. One thing you mentioned was that the Southwest was looking pretty good in terms of the index on a relative basis, and yet we've seen quite a bit of outbreak in the Southwest in terms of cases of coronavirus. So how do those things correlate? It seems a little bit contradictory to me.
Yeah, it's more of two things. One, the outbreak, if you will, in the Southwest was later in Q2. Overall, the Southwest region and Midwest regions managed the COVID response better than some of the other regions. Number two, it's more about the response to the outbreak. Those regions also were some of the last to either have very mild, almost no shutdown, or late in the quarter shutdown. So again, they had better overall economic activity as part of their response to COVID. And to your point, it remains to be seen, how they're going to respond to the spikes. It's not the fact that they have the cases,
Hmm.
It's what are they going to do to mitigate it? Are they going to just emphasize social distancing but keep the economic engines continuing to move forward,
Hmm.
or will they toy with even partial shutdowns, which would definitely impact the region?
Now, I'd like to put this in perspective economically, if I can. How far back, how much historical information does US Bank keep on this freight index? How long has it been conducting this index?
Uh, we've been processing payments in our system for about 20 years.
Hmm.
However, the most reliable data that we have in the system goes back to 2010.
I see.
Uh, but the index has only been in publication for a little less than 4 years.
So we
So
can't
we
really.
calculated back to 2010, but on
Mhm.
the actual index document that we publish, we only keep a few years.
So we can't really compare this. So the reason I asked that question is because I was wondering if you had similar information for the so-called Great Recession of 2007 through 2009, whether we could compare the figures now to then and get a sense of how this particular economy shapes up against that, as with this being the marker. But you don't have an apples to apples comparison then from that period to this one, right?
Now, sorry to say, like I said, we're more confident in our data past 2010.
Yeah. And in a larger sense, I'm just wondering, what does your freight payment index tell us about the economy as a whole? It sounds like it's a pretty good guide. Do you consider it a leading indicator? And how is it in terms of taking the temperature of the economy generally? Is this a good way to figure it out?
It's definitely a good indicator. It's definitely a data point that our customers use to fuel some of their decision making as they do other indices.
Hmm.
As I think it would be more considered a lagging indicator. The A recession was declared in February of 2008, and the data that we're seeing in later Q2, kind of supports that. So, we're
Hmm.
looking behind, but trucking is generally a lagging indicator of the economy at large.
Yeah. I'm also wondering when we talk about freight payment levels, are we talking about the drop in freight payment levels? Is that because there are indeed fewer things to pay for, fewer shipments, or is it the case of some payments lagging, some receivables going up, and terms being extended? To what degree is that the case versus just the fact that that this activity isn't even there in the first place?
I think from our index, the way that we process it, we use a similar model to like a same store sales type of model, so that we make sure that we're not measuring, for example, U.S. Bank's business success or not.
Hmm.
Um, we compare similar quarters, that making sure that the baskets, if you will, of activity are very similar. So we feel that it's a fair measure. When we talk about shipments increasing or dropping, we're talking about the velocity of the change as dropping, and
Hmm.
consequently the same with spend. We're not talking about the raw spend numbers. We're talking about
I
the
see.
velocity. So as prices drop, rates drop, as capacity tightens and things get more expensive, we'll measure the velocity of those changes in the marketplace, and that's what's reflected in the index.
But as opposed to the practices that are underway, like the length of payment terms and the like, slow paying suppliers being slow paid, isn't necessarily reflected in this index.
No, not entirely, no.
Yeah, although I hear that there's a lot of that going on. Uh, is it possible? I mean, what are you looking at in terms of getting an early look at Q3? We're just 1 month into it, not even a month into Q3 now. Any idea of how that might be looking compared to Q2?
I can't really forecast, but some of the things that we're going to be looking for is we will be, looking for some improvement, but again, that's mitigated by the response to uh, the pandemic.
Hmm.
As confidence continues to build, obviously we expect things to get better and better as more areas open up and more of those previously shut down sectors of the economy, um, and their trucking counterparts, of course, start to go back up. Hotels, basically any travel related service industry, as those
Hmm.
start to open back up and see more activity, we should see better numbers and better movement. As long as there's no severe contraction. And the other thing that would kind of be interesting to look for is what the resolution is on the world scale, as far as how the port volumes affecting the West Coast will shape up. As the global market starts to resolve as well. A lot of decisions were made at the end of Q1 going into Q2 to adapt to the pandemic, and we're just now seeing the impacts of those. And there's still going to be more adjustments as we go into Q3. So it'll be interesting to see things again start to move forward and continue to move forward.
Yeah, interesting is one word for it. Opinions vary widely, Bobby, as to when this is all going to get better, when those things that you just described is actually going to happen. And of course, nobody has the slightest idea, but there are different opinions. What do you guys think? Are you feeling like we're in for a long haul, months, years, weeks, or anything? Just give me a sense of where you think we're going.
Our economist is pretty confident that things are gonna look up again. It's cautious confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Again, from the standpoint that as things have been opening up, and we can start to see indications that the volumes are increasing and moving in the right direction, are moving in a positive direction. Again, there's some factors. I mean, we can't take a hit that big and not have some things shake out. One of the things that kind of showed up on the radar in the freight payment index for this quarter was the notion that, from California as an example, how many carriers did we lose that could not survive the shutdown? Mm-hmm. As we start to ramp things back up and there's a measure of capacity, will we find the capacity is going to get tight, which is going to drive prices up? Again, those are some of the things that we'll be looking to see as to how those shake out. Businesses that don't recover, again, that's going to, even if we cycle back up, how many businesses did we lose that will no longer, need shipping?
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, the U.S. Bank's freight payment index seems like a pretty good thermometer or barometer, as you will, for figuring out where we just were and maybe give us a sense of where we're going. But in the meantime, Bobby Holland of U.S. Bank, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time as well. Thanks for having me.